how can we help people to find and maybe create work and activities that are corresponding to their innermost values on how they want to live and what they want to achieve on this in their lives. I know it's very difficult now. It's much more difficult, and so. Everything I think centers somehow around how people find each other at local level. But isn't it? And this is my question to you that through internet and the different platforms, it's much easier to recognize like-minded people and maybe to create sort of communal exercises. And all this would also be addressing something that, at least in our country, and I'm sure that Laura knows this well, is that people feel lonely. Even young people feel very lonely. And how can we get people together? So that would be my. I mean, there's no standard recipe. There are different ways, and you can achieve sort of communal. You can do it in your neighborhood, you can do it in your town, you can then link with other people, or almost like on the other side of the planet, to compare notes. So how can we sort of create this kind of opportunities for young people? And why not people of all ages? Because I think there is this need to belong to something, to have like a mission, some sort of mission in life, which goes a little bit beyond sort of just living everyday lives.
You actually just stole my next question, which was one from the audience from our sign-up form, which has been edited a bit, but goes as follows. I've always felt like if you don't start working in climate action from an early age, it doesn't feel like a part of your journey anymore as you get older. How can we ensure that the burden of climate action does not lie only with active young people? And what strategies can be employed to engage people of all ages in climate action and emphasize its significance in our collective journey towards sustainability? So
yeah, okay. It's very much related to what I think I try to sort of. I have more questions than answers, but as a method, I believe in sort of trying to bring people together in whatever ways. And then there's always some people who maybe do not want to be so sociable, and but it's definitely, I think the answer is through communal common action, and I think the threshold for any action of such kind should be as low as possible. So you also mentioned in the first question the marginalized groups, and often the threshold for marginalized groups such as disabled people or foreigners, or let's say poor people, children who are from underprivileged families. It's very difficult to join this kind of groups. Many times I felt that for people like me, maybe yourselves as well, who are sort of, I would say, talking about myself, have a kind of a solid, safe childhood, and decent living conditions for sure, and then a very privileged political career. But we found very often that we are sort of only talking to people of similar social background, and this is, I think, a big mistake. So how to create more mixed communities, and how to invite people from underprivileged groups to join political action, even to be a candidates for elections. Because there's so much to do, because also at the political level, people who have disabilities or have experienced serious racial discrimination, these kind of voices should be heard at the political level as well. And I think we're painfully aware in the European Parliament that it's still very much like a quite homogeneous a collection of people who have very sort of privileged backgrounds. Not that we come from, not that it does have to be very wealthy and things like that, but somehow people who manage well. So how can we address those who don't have that same experience, and who cannot always join the others? So actively being aware of such sort of inclusion.
That's great. Thank you. At this point, if an audience member feels comfortable in raising their hand and maybe sharing their thoughts on this or maybe dropping an idea in the chat. We would love to see that.
Thank you, Laura, for reminding the audience that they can engage with all of the questions and answers throughout this session. The first two questions that we talked about were very much related to marginalized groups and how can we ensure the representation of different groups within the European Union. But what we think is also very important to talk about is this external aspect. So somebody in the forum mentioned that in 2020, China emitted more carbon dioxide than the rest of the world, and addressing barriers to international cooperation on climate action is paramount, especially given the urgency highlighted by the lack of effort by some countries. This example of China being only one of many where we can see this lack of cooperation. So switching the discussion towards the international aspect, how can we overcome barriers to international cooperation on climate action, and particularly in the context of the plans for the European green transition?
And one thing I think needs to be said about China is that, as you know, China is called the world's factory. It means that actually, if we look at how the sort of emission flows and money flows go, we as consumers in affluent countries, we actually cause much of those emissions. And that's why I think this idea of looking into the value chains of our production, you know, what the food we consume, the textiles, the clothes we buy, and then we will discover that actually that we leave a big climate footprint, like an adverse climate footprint in the countries of global south. China is perhaps not so much global south anymore, but it's still a country that is producing so much to us. So I think addressing these value chains is quite important to get a kind of a realistic understanding of our responsibility, because it's for instance, I believe that the amounts of clothes that we consume are just totally excessive. And we can see that who produces those clothes are the poor women in the factories in Bangladesh or of Malaysia and so on. So I think it's very important that we, while trying to promote international agreements, the COP process, of course, is very important to get other countries on board, which don't maybe do that much. But at the same time, I think we have a duty to see that through our consumption, we make things worse. And for instance, I love the idea that some people that I know in my country, that they're saying that nobody should afford to buy more than 5 new garments in a year. It's not about underwear and socks, but the rest. And I discovered myself that it's a great opportunity to see that we all have so much that we can just sort of look into our cupboards and discover that actually it's almost like a shop. You just pick up things and you use them again, or you sell them, or then you buy secondhand clothes. So, or you repair your clothes. So all this kind of new consumption styles that I think many young people are now quite interested in. So how can we promote those? Because it can be also great fun that you do things in an ecological way and stop wasting resources. But on the international cooperation, I think how I see the international climate negotiations then is that it's very often these climate COPs, they end up in a kind of a way that the poor countries say that, look, the historical burden of climate change is with you, with the rich countries. And it is true. I think the calculation is that around 85% of global historical emissions are due to industrialization. So basically our lifestyles and how our lifestyles have developed in the affluent West. So how can we address this? And now my understanding is that in the latest COP, there was a bit of a step forward in the sense that this kind of a fund was established where we can also feel responsible for helping those countries that now are the least responsible for climate change, but to suffer the most. And of course, this is just a small beginning, because the resources needed for this kind of losses and damages and taking really the development aspect to the climate policy, these are just enormous. But anyway, it was a step towards trying to find solution, because I think we can only do this all together on the planet. So this means that those who now have been a little bit protesting and not so much getting engaged in real emissions, and so it's quite necessary to overcome this. And would be interesting to know how young influencers address this question of development and climate policy.
I would also like to invite somebody from the audience to add to the previous discussion. And I saw Mert raise their hands. So if you want to speak up and yeah, just unmute yourself and go ahead with your question or commentary.
Hello, first of all, it is such a pleasure to meet all of you, especially Ms. Hautala. Can you hear me, by the way?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So my question was a bit unrelated to the topics that you just mentioned, but it is related to green transition and climate action. So as you know, the number of refugees and immigrants in Europe is growing day by day, and that leads to more urbanization. Do you think that the growing numbers of refugees and immigrants is an objective, is creating a tougher way to achieve climate action or green transition?
Sorry, if the refugees, can you repeat the last bit of your question?
Do you think that the growing number of refugees and immigrants is making the job of European Union harder for green transition?
Yeah, well, I think we shouldn't let this happen, because first of all, I think Europe still has to come to terms with the issue that we need to accept people coming from countries where they are under persecution. And clearly, in the future, this question of climate refugees must be solved, because we cannot think that if, let's say, in the Middle East or in Africa or Asia, big areas will become inhabitable, that we just we cannot say no, because this is also going to be a big cause of turmoil, and it's simply neglecting our duties to defend human rights. So I think we have to accept this, that there will be more refugees, there will be more immigrants. And yes, maybe that will lead into urbanization, because now I see that the big conflict is about housing, that we see in the Netherlands and I think in Germany, that people feel that they suffer from the presence of refugees and immigrants, because housing is scarce, is very expensive. So this, but I would say that our urban communities must be able to deal with this kind of questions. But of course, it will be a disaster if we are not going to find solutions, because then there will be a polarization of opinions in Europe, and this we should not let happen. So yes. I also believe that if we look at the sort of our consumption levels and resource use, then we can also develop more eco-efficient lifestyles and housing, so that the resources can be used on that, so that there is enough potential to for instance add in a let's say in a good way to urban housing and building. And we should, I think, in all possible situations, avoid that there will be this segregation of communities. And that is happening in many countries, in many urban regions now, and it's very detrimental. So I believe that a healthy environment in cities, it means that different kinds of people live in the same parts, and that schools are not segregated. So fight against segregation is, I think, really important, and I hope that this is understood, that with urban planning one can achieve a lot of these goals. But also we need more resources for schools and daycare places in those areas where there are more refugees and immigrants which have more like special needs. So this kind of, I think you call it affirmative action, positive discrimination. In Helsinki, there's already been for quite many years this practice that schools which have more immigrants and maybe also children of others like special needs, I could say, that they get a little more resources to make sure that everyone can be treated equally. So there are different ways, but is there the political will? Do the middle classes really pay attention to this question? Is, I think, really important to solve.
Thank you, Matt, for your question. And Heidi,
Thank you for your answers.
Thank you, Heidi, for elaborating on the complexity of the issue and how climate change is not a straightforward topic we can discuss without addressing all of the other concerns. Before proceeding on to the next question, I would also like to invite another audience member who raised their hand. Pilvi, if you can unmute yourself and proceed with your question, that would be great.
Yes, of course. It's a great pleasure to see you again, Heidi. We met 4 years ago at another UIP event, so it's great to be talking to you again. I guess I'd like to go back to the first questions and themes that were discussed in this meeting, because you were asking us about like how to engage young people and how to engage people from different age groups and how that kind of shows in our lives. I guess some of us who have come here through different youth organizations and organizations are sort of biased in the way that we've found our platform and we've found our way to discuss about like climate issues and such. But I've noticed that as a young law student in Helsinki, it's not that people are super invested in climate change, I guess. It's super easy to just go along what the corporations are offering to you. But I feel like a very valuable insight to this has been that different law firms and different corporations have started focusing more on ESG regulation and corporate sustainability due diligence directive, which is very important. And it's, I think all of my law student friends have started looking into it and actually taking more courses on it because it's so employers really want for you to have expertise in that field. So as a fellow Finn, and maybe there's also been resistance in other countries in the Europe for the directive, how do you feel about this? And at least I am really scared about the polarization. If in this bubble that I am in, people have been very excited about the ESG regulation and legislation, but then there is the other side who don't want to apply it and who are against it, and then maybe even the governmental side who's like, we don't need this. So what are your thoughts on that?
Okay, I mean, you really hit my favorite topic, I'm afraid.
I figured I need to ask you about this.
Yeah, I try to sort of limit myself a bit because I could talk the whole evening about it. But yeah, indeed, I think we have this phenomenon, and I think it's very much due to let's say, demand and requirements from society to companies that I mean, all of you, I'm pretty sure that every day you are thinking what you consume and how was that cocoa produced on the chocolate which you maybe eat, by the way, which is a real luxury product. No cocoa worker in Africa ever has tasted chocolate. But so anyway, and I'm sure that you're all very much into like reusing clothes and things like that. So this just has to become a new normal. And the companies are ready for it. So that's why it is so tragic now that as I explained in my, I think, first intervention, that we see that there's this backlash and all kinds of political horse trading. I feel so ashamed of how things are now being decided at European level. I couldn't imagine. And it's really tough. But on the other hand, as you said, now there's a huge attention to this question. And it means that it's also a bit of an educational exercise. And if we will survive this, and we need everybody's support, even young law students in Helsinki can help by telling the members of parliament that they should turn around the Finnish position, which is really, I mean, it's shameful. But you also know that the backlash is at different levels. In United States, there are states that are banning the use of environmental and social and governance ESG criteria in investment. So I hope it's just a sort of a last battle against really regressive forces, but you will have to take into account, and I'm sure you're aware, that the political fluctuations in Europe are quite risky at the moment. So many of the people that I work with say that we must be able to finish these things now before the elections, because we don't know how the European Parliament and the governments of the member states will be after European elections. So there is this feeling that we have to fight against a big backlash. And I think your role in the elections is very important, that you, just like Fridays for Future last time with others, I'm not saying it was only Fridays for Future, but climate was such a big topic. So how can you find a kind of a new angle to your climate activities to engage people in looking at how they vote in European elections? But one thing is that this polarization around these issues has meant, and I think you also, Pilvi, you hinted a little bit at it has become big politics. You remember there was a time when climate was okay, was some kind of a bit freakish thing, a kind of undertone somewhere, but and definitely not the biggest political issue. But now, because of some political parties and social groups and some conservative business associations, they are so much against the green transition and its continuation. So it's also given the opportunity for those who want to take it to the next level to present their ideas. So, I mean, I guess you would say that this is a silver lining in this risk of political backlash. So let's use that all together in our different activities. So it's big politics. It's very important. So it's not anymore a side issue.
Yeah, thank you, Heidi.
Thank you, Pilvi, for this wonderful question. I will be presenting one more question that we had pre-prepared, and then we will move back to audience questions and comments again. So our question is as follows: how can policymakers better engage with young voters to ensure their concerns and priorities are reflected in the decision-making process?
By getting interested in the topics. Maybe I'm totally sort of biased, but I believe that there are some topics that are Okay, so let's try. I think policymakers must take into account that there are sort of new emerging topics. And one of the things that I, by the way, think is really and must be brought to the center of politics is animal rights, animal welfare. You can feel it in the European Parliament that there's quite a lot of, let's say, support for making it known that production animals are sentient beings and they need to be treated in such a way. And by the way, why do we need so much meat production? Because now we have all these wonderful vegan proteins that we can use. So what's the sense of having this kind of food production system? So that could maybe be one topic that could become more important, especially now that you have seen the farmers' demonstrations all over Europe. So I would say that it's kind of how can we tell the farming community that yes, we will appreciate food production from them, it's absolutely vital, but to demand that we don't continue to support farmers in the old way, because I think the more we give in for, let's say, for those who say that no, we cannot afford reducing pesticides used in food production, no, we cannot improve too much the production animals conditions because there's a huge cost. So I think the food production and agriculture subsidies will be a big issue in the next term. So maybe that's something that if you connect that well with the climate issue, it will be something that a lot of people will feel is close to them. And certainly, for instance, I saw that Denmark has now taken on a kind of a lead on looking for, how is it called now? It's plant-based food production. So let's support this kind of initiatives and let's try to take them to the next level. So that's a little bit my idea that these kind of things are emerging as important issues in politics. And yeah, indeed.
Thank you for that very good answer. I will be moving on to more audience questions now. There's one in the chat from, I'm sorry if I say this wrong, Sashinsky. And the question is a bit long, but bear with us. The transition to green industry and energy is quite expensive. This makes the final product more expensive and takes away money that could be invested in expanding and modernizing production. For example, China does not do this, and this helps China win competition in the free global market. In addition to the growing Chinese carbon emissions themselves, this makes us more vulnerable to direct threats from China. Without prioritizing the spread of green ideas around the world, and without decisive steps in this direction in foreign policy, will we be able to save the planet?
Yeah, well, that's very wise. How can I even try? Okay, first of all, I think in our countries we need to look at the incentives and that goes back to the sort of acceptance of the green transition. I believe we should always say green just transition. I think we learned to speak about climate justice. It's not this concept has been there for quite some time, but this kind of social aspect of everything must be there. And but I mean, the truth is that still our governments and even in Europe waste huge resources on fossil fuel subsidies. So how can we make this go away more quickly? And yeah, I actually believe that one of the little signs of hope in the past COP conference of parties was it in Abu Dhabi? Where was it again? Was that there's now some sort of stronger commitment one day to get away from fossil fuels. So this is one thing that a lot of resources are wasted. But then again, if we look at China, now for instance, we saw that some European producers of solar panels, they have lost their competitiveness because of competition from China. And it's very well known, this is even not news, that one of the places where many of these Chinese solar panels are produced, which are now a kind of a competitiveness threat to European producers because of lower costs, is Xinjiang. And what happens in Xinjiang? That's a place in China where Uyghurs are brought to these rehabilitation centers. It's a terrible thing to say rehabilitation center, but they're kind of brainwashed, and many of them have to do forced labor. And now in Europe, at least in Europe, what we are trying to finish before the European elections is another important piece of legislation. That is the prohibition to place in the EU market products that are produced with forced labor. So there are many inherent problems in Chinese products, and that perhaps can help a little bit to fight such production that is sort of wiping away production in Europe, and also to serve, let's say, human rights issues. I'm not sure that I totally grasp this complicated question, so maybe if you want to come back to it. But these supply chains of products coming from China are often quite problematic. So we have to look at that.
I think your answer was very sufficient, given that if we only focused on supply chains and if we proceeded with this topic, I think we could dedicate the whole hour to this, especially given your expertise in this field. What I would like to do is I would like to give some commentary from the audience. So it's not a question, it's commentary, but I do believe that your perspective on this will also be beneficial. So Joao said the following. I recently talked about the first topic, which was marginalized communities and how do we include them in climate action, with some friends from my political party about not having enough representation in EU institutions of people coming from disadvantaged backgrounds. Poverty-related issues, for instance, are multidimensional, and we need every member of society to care about it and discuss it. However, I do wonder if those who participate in policymaking on these subjects are truly aware of what it is like to live in such disadvantaged contexts.
Well, I'm sure not. I'm sure that they are not. So that's, for instance, I believe that in local decision making, it's very important that that we get to know immigrants. We get to go to places where people with disabilities live, and also I would say that the homes for the care of elderly are not always great places. So even how we respect or disrespect old people after they are not anymore able to live at home is really very important. But also concerning refugees, at my time I got to sort of understand a little bit more about what a situation of a refugee faces when I got to know it happened to be Chechen refugees from Russia who were under very serious persecution. So I would say that perhaps campaign to sort of invite more people to make friends with an immigrant, or maybe to go and spend some time in places where disabled people work to help. Maybe that can also be linked with the idea that, and I know there are different ideas in different countries, but if we think about this kind of service, that at least I think in Germany there is experience of this kind of society, a period of young people spending for societal service. I don't know what you think about that, but should everyone be somehow invited to spend some time in underprivileged communities and to serve the society in that way? But this could be controversial, I know, because there's so much pressure on young people anyway. But would it have to be young people? I'm not sure. So you cannot really talk about people without knowing the situation. And for instance, there is this quite, I think, good slogan from the communities working on, I mean, disabled people who work to defend disabled people, and don't want to be at the mercy of well-to-do people. So I have friends in the disabled community who started an own movement to improve their lives. And what is worldwide being sort of used as a slogan is nothing about us without us. And so I think the key is that the underprivileged communities, people with special needs, I mean, they would have to be a part of decision making about their needs. And that's something that is not always forgotten or remembered.
Thank you for this answer. I would like to change the topic because in one of your previous answers, you have mentioned the importance of agriculture, animal welfare, agricultural subsidies, etc. And I think also given your educational background, it would be very relevant for the audience for you to answer the following, which was asked by, sorry if I mispronounced, Ioannis. As climate change is affected by the agricultural expansion of the crops production, how will the subsidies given by the EU promote a more greener alternative to agricultural remote regions, where the supply of those alternatives is low and a rising demand on pushes the prices of local agricultural markets to rise, forcing the producers to buy more polluting, cheaper products to keep up with the production?
Wow, this is very, very, very difficult. So, so this was about the remote areas.
So this question was regarding the subsidies that currently exist in the EU and how maybe they can be altered to address some of the challenges that we face and some of the challenges that producers tend to buy more polluting fertilizers, etc. To keep up with the production, and how can we maybe adjust the structure of subsidies to combat these drawbacks that we are currently experiencing that are mostly concerned with the supply of either products or fertilizers, and yeah.
Okay, so yeah, maybe just about these recent demonstrations by farmers all over Europe. I think it's a real pity that they don't always think about how to change the system. I think we can all agree that in the chain of how it's called, the production chain, it's very often the farmers who get the least. And let's say the supermarkets take the biggest share and so on. So that this income question has to be solved, of course. But could it be that the lesson of this sort of, let's say, lack of appreciation and price crisis with farmers could only be solved by thinking that there needs to be more subsidies to local farming and rural communities. This I think is so that some sort of governments and the EU is kind of trying to understand that how could one better support rural communities and not just sort of certain kind of food production. But then there's, of course, you can create the link with the circular economy, which I think it's inevitable that we have to sort of stop using virgin raw materials, including fertilizers and things like that. That we don't actually. I think we add unnecessary costs to food production by being so relying so much on external inputs like fertilizers and pesticides. So yes, I am agronomist by training. So I mentioned that we created this vegetarian restaurant 50 years ago. So it's like half a century ago, wow. And I can't believe it myself, but so it is. So our idea was that we wanted to create links between consumers who often live in cities. We were those. And with farmers, most often organic farmers in the rural countryside, so that there was a kind of a direct connections. And so I would say that to create better forms of cooperatives, to get people to buy from local producers. And I'm sure that there could be support from the EU agriculture policy, and maybe I'm sure there is some already on how this kind of small-scale farming communities, which have direct links to consumers, could be organized. And maybe there could be some direct selling and maybe a restaurant, a shop, so could also create new kind of jobs which are not only in the sort of basic food production, but also like, yeah. Not that this is my specialty anyway, but I think to bring the social aspect more into subsidies and support and support less production which is based on expensive external inputs could be one way to go.
Wonderful, thank you so much. We're unfortunately running out of time, so I would like to wrap up this dialogue by asking if Heidi would like to reiterate one of your questions from the beginning, or maybe ask a new one, and everyone can drop their answers in the chat, because unfortunately we don't have time for a verbal answer.
So can I ask? Yeah, okay. So, what do you think is the most important way to bring climate change into the European election debates? What would you like to prioritize?
And now feel free to add your answers in the chat and we will read them out loud, or at least the first couple that we have time for.
And I think while we are waiting for the answers, it would be nice if I just recap this session in a few words or sentences to maybe just briefly remind you of everything that we discussed so far. So at the beginning, Heidi said the following sentence, which is we are sleepwalking into a big disaster and the situation is getting more serious. So how do we ensure a smooth green transition in light of arising issues such as the cost of living, or should we just continue doing business as usual? Some of the topics that we mentioned were marginalized groups focusing on a local level. This topic was mentioned all throughout the session. We were talking about communal action and the big problem of us tending only to talk with people from similar social backgrounds. So how do we invite people from underprivileged groups to join political action? We also mentioned international cooperation and the idea of triple injustice, which is the countries that have done the least to climate change are now suffering the most, and how we can focus on new consumption styles because our Western industrialized lifestyle has undeniably exaggerated the climate change. We mentioned ESG regulation and the polarization when it comes to that. We were briefly mentioning animal welfare, food production, and also agriculture subsidies also at the very end. We mentioned how green transition threatens competitiveness and innovation. And we also mentioned, well, Heidi mentioned this idea of bringing the social aspect into different policies, such as the agricultural subsidies. So this was a brief recap of everything that we have discussed so far. And Laura, if you want to read out a few things from the audience from Heidi's question, I think that would be great, a great way to end this dialogue.
Yes, so one answer is whether the politicians feel the actions that are already in motion are sufficient enough. Are they effective and not just numbers? For example, Neste or Ori. Someone else says, I think growing their own food, their balconies, reducing waste, plastic, chemical usage, having healthy relationships, and innovating new technology for transportation where there's minimal pollution. Then there's money and pressure, the manufacturing companies, industries, sorry, as these people will then try to pressure the MEPs and other people in the EU to change policies, bringing forth the problem of climate change and allowing the consumer to voice themselves against the capital holders. Stress its importance, call out the states for putting the issue on the back burner for more pressing issues such as Ukraine or COVID. Ensure any actions taken and their results slash successes slash failure are communicated to the public in order to build a public awareness. My vote in the elections will go to people that have the clearest and the most urgent climate action plans. For me, the priority needs to be on accountability and change within the corporations with the highest emissions. Personal responsibility is very important, but cannot bring about real change if there's no change in the actions of the biggest businesses. I would like to see a stronger emphasis on structural change and holding industry accountable rather than asking citizens to adapt their individual lifestyles in the campaigning around the elections. And it could be useful to be more explicit on how the climate crisis affects everyone's daily lives. Too often it is about plastic bags and how hot or cold the weather will be, something which is very important, of course, and not enough about the true multidimensionality about this. And with that, I would like to thank you for this incredible discussion. It has truly been a pleasure to hear from Ms. Hautala as well as all of you in the audience. We hope you follow the EYP's social media accounts to find out more about the YEMCA. This is on Instagram, for example, at EYP_network. Heidi will not be running in the upcoming European elections, but we do hope that this has inspired all of you to vote in the upcoming elections and pursue active citizenship in general, because we love encouraging that. And that is all that we have planned for this very, very compact hour. So thank you once again.
I'm very impressed by your answers to my question, and I hope that I could get that. and use them in some presentation. So is that okay?
I'm sure we could arrange that, yes.
Yeah, great. Okay, so thanks a lot and good luck. And I think it's super topical now to defend the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. You may have seen that even the, UN High Commissioner for Human Rights has said that we need this because it's perceived as the biggest reform of all times that could make corporations accountable for what they do in our name for us as consumers. So I hope that you will contribute to this with your influencer campaigns just now. So thanks a lot, and it was a great discussion. And